Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. David Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. David is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David.
So this is podcast 191, which we actually recorded. It's on in our Distortion Starter Kit series, and it's on mental filter and discounting the positive. And the other podcast was okay, but it didn't have any real pizzazz to it because I couldn't think of a great clinical example of how discounting the positive and mental filter could really be super helpful for someone. But then a dear colleague, Dr. Matt May, reminded me of a tremendous vignette involving this distortion. So we thought we would record it again and bring you something to be a little zippier and a little hopefully more inspiring. We do have a few endorsements that came in just the last few days, and usually you, Rhonda, read them, but because we're at a distance and I have the printed copies here, I'll go ahead and read them. But to make a long story short, we really appreciate your encouragement and support with our efforts. And this was from a gentleman, Marco, we'll use his first name, who I think was just starting with the Feeling Good podcast and was listening to one of the very early ones on, number one, the very first podcast, where we talk about the importance of therapeutic resistance and lowering resistance in order to get rapid recovery. And he wrote, I love the whole idea about resistance. I'm currently dealing with a depressive episode, and I had not thought that maybe one of the biggest barriers could actually be my own resistance. This is very eye-opening, exclamation point. And then I showed this to our colleague, Dr. Alex Clark, who said, this rocks. So thank you so much for that, Marco, and also Alex.
Well, I love what Alex said to me one day, actually this morning, when he said that,
talk into the mic there so I can hear you.
I said, I love what Alex told us this morning, that when you're working with someone's resistance, you're actually helping find out what's right with them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's such a key thing to team therapy, and it's such a departure from traditional therapy where we look at resistance as some bad thing, like you want to feel sorry for yourself, or you want to be a victim, or you're trying to get attention. And we look at resistance from a radically different perspective, that it shows not what's wrong with you, but what's right with you, and this can open up the doors for super rapid recovery. We also just got a nice one from I think your colleague and mine, Nivedita.
Yes.
Nivedita, saying from India.
Right.
And she sent a beautiful message that her thoughts, prayers, wishes, and healing vibes are for all of us, our families and friends, as well as colleagues. Please take care. Your well-being means a lot to us people in the team community. And as some of you may remember, that Rhonda and Heather Clegg went to India to teach just a few months ago and did a fabulous job to get the team started in India. And so anyway, she says she has 10 copies of the Feeling Good Handbook to give over as gifts when people resist buying. What a fantastic lady she is. But she wrote this, I really think you're a genius. I wish I had met you earlier. I would have been super skilled by now. Your podcasts bring tears to my eyes. How did you ever think of all these awesome methods? Love your colleagues, Fabrice, especially Rhonda, Taylor, and of course, Jill. I know I can never be you. It's a sacrilege to even thought that I can, because You're God, and I'm not kidding. Thank you for that. Tell me more. But I do aspire to be the Jill Levitt of India, since you're so proud of her, and she's another genius. Take care, Dr. Burns. Bless you. Hope to see you again at the summer intensive this year. And here's another mind blower. By the way, I'm doing my third listening to all of your podcasts.
Wow.
You will be amused to know that I'm beginning to sound a bit like you.
Oh, good.
So Nivedita, thank you for that. And then a short one from Raoul. I don't know where he's writing from, but he just commented on our last podcast, or I don't know if it's our last, I don't know where this, I guess 184, where we talked about what comes first, negative thoughts or feelings, solving the chicken versus the egg problem, and other Ask Davids. And she just said, thank you very much for that excellent work. So we sure appreciate that. Now, to dive in here to today's podcast on mental filter and discounting the positive. The definition of mental filter is when it's the drop of ink that discolors the beaker of water. And those of you who are perfectionists or extremely self-critical will be familiar with this. That's where you pick out a negative detail and get all upset because of some failure that you've had, and you discount or overlook the many things that you've done right. That's mental filter. And then discounting the positive almost always goes hand in hand with mental filter. And that's when you say that the good things about you, the things that you have accomplished, don't even count. And that when you do that, that way you can maintain a uniformly negative view of yourself. From a general social psychology point of view, something I have little expertise in, and Rhonda has a little bit of expertise, but there is a phenomenon that's known. Social psychologists study social interactions and how we relate to society. And it's not so much about healing depression, but thinking how people process information. And they have this thing called, various biases that people have. So let's say that you're rooting strongly for one baseball team, and there's a close play at home plate. Half of the fans will be shouting, "Kill the ump." And then the other half will be shouting, "Great call,"
Right.
depending on which team they're rooting for. And it shows how our bias can actually influence our perceptions. And the same thing happens in depression. When you're depressed, you're almost like you're in a hypnotic trance. And you so believe that you're a bad person that you pick out all of the bad things about yourself, and you just discount some of the good things. And this happens in anger. You pick out all the things about the person you're angry with that turn you off, and you discount their good qualities, or you insist that their good qualities don't count. They say, "Oh, she's just saying that to be nice, or to try to con me," or something like she doesn't mean it. And the most common example of discounting the positive is when someone gives you a compliment. And you say, "Oh, they're like they're just saying that to be nice. They didn't really like my talk. It wasn't
They didn't
that."
really mean it.
Yeah, they didn't mean it. It wasn't that good. You had a fabulous example of mental filtering after one of your first hosting experiences. Do you remember that one, Rhonda?
I definitely remember it like it was yesterday. We were talking, and I said, in our conversation, I said, "Oh, diagnostic labels are meaningless." And then it was just one of probably 100 things that I said. And then when we got off the podcast, I just thought about that constantly. I was ruminating over it again, like, "Oh my God, that was so stupid. Why would I say that? That was so overbroad. There are a lot of good reasons to use diagnostic labels." And
then it hurt, right?
And yes.
You feel like embarrassed and ashamed, and kind of like your idiocy has been revealed to the world.
Right. I'm totally inadequate.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I might have mentioned on a previous show that I was on a TV show in Cincinnati when I was getting some marketing for my first book, Feeling Good, and they had a live audience, and it was in Cleveland actually, or maybe it was Cincinnati, one of those towns, but it was a morning talk show, local TV talk show, and it was a really nice experience. And then afterwards, the host said, could I talk to you a little bit, because I've got a problem. And then he said that every day he gets about, this was before the internet, it was way back, and like 1981 or something like that. And he said he'll get 300 letters after each show typically, and 299 of them are just filled with praise, because he was a real nice guy and he did an excellent job. But he said that he'll typically get one very critical or hostile email, or just criticizing something he did or an error he made or whatever. And he says he just ruminates on that one all day long and feels miserable. And then he tells him, he just ignores the 299 positives as if they didn't count. And that's just a perfect example of mental filter.
I can think of another example that's similar. When you are a manager and you give someone a performance review, or when you're somebody who receives a performance review, and they say the majority of the things they say about you are really positive, but one or two things could be improved, all you focus on is what is the negatives that you were told, or the things that could be improved, and you don't remember the positives that the person told you.
Yeah, I do that after each workshop. I get evaluation after each workshop, both quantitative evaluations and I have them write down what did you like the least, what I do or say that turned you off the most, and then what did you like the best. Then I sort them out, and I do calculations and give a report to the audience the next day, and I promise to read out loud the 5 worst things that people said about me and the 5 best things that they liked about the workshop. But I know when I get back to my hotel room and I'm looking at the evaluations and I sort them in piles, the first ones I look at are the worst evaluations. And what did they say? And then if there's nothing very stinging or awful, I feel a wave of joy and relief and go and look at the good ones.
Yeah.
But it's exactly what you're saying. So you if you're struggling with depression or anxiety or feeling a lot of anger, this is one of the 10 cognitive distortions, but it's likely pretty familiar to you. Now, there's a lot of techniques that you can use to combat it. You always want to do positive reframing with a negative thought. What does this thought show about you that's positive and awesome, before you try to challenge it? And the double standard technique is another helpful technique. What would you say this to a dear friend? Would you say, oh gosh, look at this one error you made, and all the good things about you don't count? Or what? No, you wouldn't say that to a friend. What would you say to a friend, and why? And would you be willing to talk to yourself the way you talk to a dear friend? But one of the classic techniques is examine the evidence, and that's the one that I suddenly remembered a really good vignette, because when I started in cognitive therapy, I started attending Dr. Beck's weekly cognitive therapy group. I had been focused entirely on biological psychiatry, prescribing drugs, and doing research on brain chemistry. And I started going to Dr. Beck's cognitive therapy group because I was looking for something that would work better than all the pills that I was throwing at people. I wasn't seeing a lot of cures from depression from antidepressant pills. Some people improved a little, some improved a good bit, but most weren't really changing. So I heard about this cognitive therapy, and it's your thoughts that upset you, and the thoughts that upset you were distorted, and you can change the way you think and change the way you feel. And I just didn't believe that you could change the way you think and change the way you feel. So I went to his group to kind of prove to myself that cognitive therapy was baloney. And then I was shocked to discover that it was really helpful to many people I'd been stuck with. One of my earliest cognitive therapy patients was a woman who was referred to me from the intensive care unit at our hospital. She was an elderly woman from Latvia, and she had made a suicide attempt and had survived that suicide attempt, and then they referred her to me for follow-up. So I thought, and I was giving her antidepressants and kind of doing non-specific talk therapy every week, and I could see that she was not improving. So I asked her if I could present her case to the weekly cognitive therapy seminar and see what Dr. Beck thought. So she thought that was fine. And so I said to Dr. Beck, well, I have this woman who tried to kill herself. How would you approach this from a cognitive therapy point of view? And she said, well, thoughts cause emotions. So you'd have to ask her what she was telling herself. What were her negative thoughts at the very moment she attempted to kill herself? And I thought that was great. And so I went back the next session and told her what Dr. Beck said, that I was supposed to find out what her negative thoughts were. And she said, oh, well, I was telling myself that I've never accomplished anything meaningful in my life, so that I was a worthless human being, and that's why I decided to kill myself. And so she said, so what am I supposed to do about it? I said, well, you have to wait a week. I have to go back to the seminar again and ask Dr. Beck, what to do next. So she was fine with that. So I went and asked Dr. Beck, and he said, oh, well, examine the evidence. Ask her to make a list of, 4 or 5 things she has accomplished during her life. And I thought, wow, that makes perfect sense. It's so simple. So I went back to her the next week, and I said, Dr. Beck said that you're supposed to make a list of 4 or 5 things you have accomplished during your life. Let's, examine the evidence. Is it true that you've never accomplished anything worthwhile? And she said, well, see, that's the problem, Dr. Burns. I can't think of anything I've ever accomplished that's meaningful or worthwhile. So I gave up on it, and I said, well, why don't you maybe take it as a homework assignment? Maybe you can come up with something, and we can talk about it again next week. So the next week, she came back for her session. I forgot that I'd given this homework assignment. I did my usual empathy and how's your dose of the antidepressant and any side effects, and do you need a refill, and just this non-specific talk thing that I did. And then she said, halfway through, she said, oh, Dr. Burns, did you want to see my homework assignment? And I said, oh, yeah. Were you able to come up with anything? And she handed me a list of 10 things. And number 1 on the list, she said that her husband had died in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany or Nazi Latvia, whatever, but that she had escaped and smuggled her kids out of the Nazi territories and made it to America.
Wow.
And she said, well, I thought maybe that was an accomplishment. And then number 2 on the list, she said, and when I got to America, I worked scrubbing people's floors and cleaning their houses, worked on my hands and knees to put food on the table. And so my 2 boys and I would have a place to sleep and food to eat. And she said, maybe you could consider that an accomplishment. And then she said, and my oldest son just graduated first in his class from the Harvard Business School. And so maybe I could take some pride in that. And then she said, I'm a gourmet chef. And then she said, I speak 5 languages fluently. And stuff like that, just amazing things that she had done in her life that she had discounting the positive, thinking those things didn't count. And then I said to her, well, how do you reconcile this list of phenomenally meaningful achievements that what you just told me? She said, I said, you're bringing tears to my eyes. And how do you reconcile this with your belief that you've never accomplished anything and that you've had a meaningless life? And she said, Dr. Burns, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't reconcile. And I said, how much do you now believe that you've never accomplished anything meaningful or worthwhile? She says, I don't believe it at all. Mm. And then I said, how are you feeling now? And she said, oh, I'm feeling a lot better. And then she said, do you have some more techniques for me? And I said, well, that's the only one I've learned so far. So you have to wait another week, and then I'll give you a new technique next week. But that's my most heartwarming
Oh, that is
story.
so moving.
Yeah. So
I love that story.
Anyway, those are some things to think about when you're involved in the distortion mental filter and discounting the positive. But I think we have to emphasize what we have in every podcast in this series is that before you can crush any negative thought, you've got to be motivated and make a list of what that thought shows about you that's positive and awesome, and what are some benefits of having that thought. Like, in fact, we could. You want to do that quickly for
Let's
this
do
woman,
that.
even though I didn't have that powerful tool in those early days. But when she was telling herself, "I've never accomplished anything meaningful or worthwhile," she's being very self-critical, and then she's feeling anxious and depressed and ashamed and inadequate and guilty and worthless and so forth. What do her thoughts and feelings show about her, Rhonda, that's positive and awesome, number one? And number two, what do her negative thoughts and feelings show about her, or what are some benefits to her in having these kinds of negative thoughts and feelings?
Well, some. I mean, to me, these sound pretty obvious, but she seems to have a really high standard for herself.
Okay, now number one, so I'll list that. If we were doing a session now, then I would list high standards, and then I would say, and have your high standards motivated you to accomplish things?
Well, I would imagine that they did.
Yeah, so that it's a lot of accomplishments from the high standards and self criticism. What are some other advantages?
I think it shows how humble she is.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, humility as opposed to arrogance. That's huge. What else?
I think it shows her dedication to her children.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. And to children, and she's obviously passed her values on to her son, who just aced it at Harvard Medical School. He probably has high standards too.
Right. Yes.
And what are some others? When she's self-critical and says, "I've never accomplished anything meaningful."
Besides being humble.
Well, I've got one. I can throw one in.
Throw one in.
Well, when you're self-critical, you're being honest and realistic, since we all do have a lot of flaws,
right?
And it's better to acknowledge them and to be accountable. Another thing is that you're accountable rather than blaming the world and blaming other people. You're saying the buck stops here.
Right, which shows that she has a lot of integrity. And
integrity. Yeah, is that important? Integrity. Yes. And so that type of thing. And so we want to make the patient, even though I didn't have this amazing new tool way back, this must have been 1976 when I had this patient, or 1977, and I barely knew what I was doing in terms of psychotherapy. But now I don't even remember what I was saying. But that
you didn't have this tool of the positive reframe when you first started working with her.
Yeah, but it's so helpful now, because we want to sell you on your negative thoughts and feelings before we try to take them away, and then say, now if there's a magic dial, like you're 90% depressed and 90% ashamed, what would you want to dial those feelings down to? So you could keep this list of 7 or 8, or we often have a list of 20 positives. And because if you press a magic button and all your negative feelings disappear entirely, then all these things go down the drain. And then she might say, well, gosh, 10% would be enough depression. I don't need 90 or 100%. And maybe guilt or shame, maybe 5%, and this type of thing. And then at that person, the patient generally already feels better, because you're no longer ashamed of your of your negative feelings. You're no longer ashamed of your negative thoughts. You can actually take some pride in them when you see that your suffering does not result from what's wrong with you, but from what's right with you.
Right. That can be a really empowering practice and experience to see what's right about all of the negative thoughts. Like, oh, yeah. It's very eye-opening.
Yeah, if you tried to sell me on this when I was starting out, I would have laughed in your face, because I was so heavily trained in the idea that depression is a bad thing that results from a chemical imbalance or a personality defect, and that you're supposed to fix the patient. And that's why I love doing team therapy, because it's working with someone and admiring someone, working with them on a team collaboratively, and honoring not only their symptoms, but their resistance.
No, and we're not doing that in a phony way or
no,
in a manipulative way. I mean, we really are honoring them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the moment you get them to see that their symptoms, what we call symptoms, negative thoughts and feelings, are actually a beautiful, positive thing, then suddenly it seems like they don't need them anymore. And it's easy to knock the negative thoughts out of the park, and that can bring in rapid recovery. But in the old days, we had some rapid recoveries too, as with this patient, because the cognitive techniques themselves can often be incredibly powerful.
Oh.
And is this sayonara for today?
I think this is sayonara for today.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. The theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.